With me now is Professor Eric Grove. He's the Director of International Security and War Studies at the University of Salford. He's followed the inquiry very closely. Professor, good afternoon.
Hello.
The 9/11 as the catalyst for action against Iraq was a revelation this morning, wasn't it?
If one of my students had written that, I would have written a big comment in the margin saying, what's the connection? I mean, because there isn't really, only in the most generous and tenuous of senses. I think the argument goes that because it was clear that these jihadi terrorists were willing to kill large numbers of people at once, then they might welcome the opportunity of using chemical or biological weapons, or indeed, if they could get their hands on one, that was very unlikely, a nuclear weapon. And clearly, Mr. Blair's assessment was that Saddam Hussein might wish to be the provider of those weapons. There is absolutely zero evidence that he would wish to do that. He was very anti-jihadi. In fact, he was the best person for keeping jihadis down that we had in Iraq, and that's one reason we've been sort of backing him for a long time against the Iranians, certainly. So I'm afraid I can't see the logic, but I don't think Mr. Blair is a very logical person anyway.
Mr. Blair puts his case, and is a very good performer and puts it very well. His argument is,
of the first order.
And he firmly believes that Saddam had WMD, whether 9/11 was the right catalyst or not. Many people believed Saddam Hussein had WMD. Do you?
No, and in fact my intelligence sources and defence intelligence told me before the war that if there was anything, if it was nerve gas, it would be sludge. There might be a little bit of mustard gas, but that was it. Nothing more than that.
So if you knew that, the Prime Minister presumably knew that.
Well, it depends what the superiors of those people were telling the Prime Minister. I mean, I think there was a systemic intelligence failure. I mean, I think that the intelligence services, or some of them, and I think John Scarlett, who I know vaguely actually, is not guiltless in this regard. I mean, I think that the Joint Intelligence Committee gave the government the kind of intelligence they thought it wanted to hear, rather than their overall assessment of the reliability of the sources. And some of those sources were very unreliable.
So, are you of the opinion, when Mr. Blair stood up and said he has got WMD, Mr. Blair believed he had got WMD because the intelligence was in front of him and he believed his intelligence?
I think he believed that Iraq might have them, but he put forward a case of certainty that he clearly ought to have known wasn't right. I mean, when he said that Iraq has a growing programme, for example, and the 45-minute claim, which did have a lot of salience at the time, these were claims which, shall we say, were arguments spinning out of control.
Something to which he's referred, actually, himself, subsequently. All right, he's also said today in the inquiry that even if WMD were not the reason, it was right to remove Saddam.
Well, at a cost of many thousands of people. I mean, our own casualties and the Americans, but more importantly, the poor people of Iraq. I mean, the number of people who have died in Iraq. I know there are arguments, oh, well, now the infant mortality rate is now down, but more people are dying now under 5 in Iraq than virtually in any other country except Zimbabwe, and that's not a very good example. So, in fact,
didn't Iraqis welcome the removal of a dictator, though?
Some did, yes, but then when security broke down and they weren't getting water and they weren't getting electricity, it became a much more balanced and nuanced thing. Yes, I think most Iraqis were pleased to get rid of Saddam Hussein, but Saddam Hussein actually did provide a certain amount of stability. He did it at a great price, of course, but I think it would be interesting to do a calculation. I haven't done it, I haven't got time, but I thought of doing it, of calculating the number of people who Saddam Hussein might have killed in that period and the number of people who actually died because of the war and its aftermath.
Somebody will, I'm sure. Professor, very briefly and finally, where does this leave Mr. Blair, do you think?
About where he was before, heartily disliked and despised by a very large number of people. This will stay with him for the rest of his career. I mean, it is. I'm sure that somebody will write a PhD thesis in about 30 years' time pointing out that, there were some positive sides to the Blair government. But Iraq is going to hang around Mr. Blair's neck like Munich hung around Chamberlain's.
And it may indeed hang around his party's neck in the run up to the next
Absolutely.
election. Professor, thank you very much indeed for your time. Pleasure.